Stream. Tonight we are going back almost 7 decades, back to 1958, to Sweden, to our World Cup that completely changed the history of Football World Cup. And our topic tonight is 1958 World Cup, the incredible facts, secrets you never knew. This was not just another World Cup. This was the tournament where a 17-year-old boy named Pelé announced himself to the world. It was the tournament where Brazil won the first World Cup title. It was the tournament where the French striker named Just Fontaine scored an incredible 13 goals, a record that still stands for a single World Cup. And it was a tournament filled with dramatic matches, tactical changes, extraordinary passionaries, unforgettable goals, and stories that many football fans today have never heard. So if you are watching live, make sure you stay and until the end, because we are going to uncover some of the most fascinating stories from Sweden 1958. And I want to know something from you right now. Who do you think was the biggest star of 1958 World Cup? Pelé, Garincha, Giri, Just Fontaine, or someone else? Drop your answer in the live chat. Let's see the scenes. The year is 1958. The World Cup is being hosted by Sweden, and 16 national teams are competing for football's biggest prize. This was a very different Football World Cup. There was no modern war. There was no giant digital screens. There were no social media platforms. There were not millions of fans watching highlights on their phones. Football was experienced through newspapers, radio, photographs, and television broadcasters. And yet this tournament would create images that would become immortal. One of those images would be a teenage Pelé celebrating with the Jules Rimet Trophy. But before we get that historic moment, we need to understand what Brazil was facing. Brazil had already experienced heartbreak a previous World Cup. The biggest trauma was the famous 1950 World Cup defeat to Uruguay on home soil. That defeat has left a deep psychological scar on Brazilian football. By 1958, Brazil was not simply trying to win a tournament. They were trying to prove that Brazilian football could finally become world champion, and they had some extraordinary talent. There was Didi, one of the great midfielders of his generation. There was Garincha, a spectacular winger whose dribbling could leave defenders completely confused. There was Nelson Santos, one of the great defenders. There was Captain Bellini, there was Baba, and then there was a teenager, his name Edson Arantes do Nascimento. The world soon knew him simply as Pelé. Here is one of the most fascinating stories from 1958. Today it seems obvious that Pelé was destined for greatness, but before the tournament it was not just simple. There were concerns about whether the 17-year-old was physically and psychologically ready for the World Cup. FIFA has reported that Brazil's team physiologists had actually questioned whether Pelé and Garrincha should play. Imagine that the player we now regard as one of the football's greatest ever legends was considered too young and inexperienced. But Brazil's coach Vicente Fiola trusted his instincts, and eventually the teenager got his opportunity. Pelé made his World Cup debut against the Soviet Union, and from there the story begins. Now, here is something interesting. Brazil's early matches were not exactly perfect. The team drew 0-0 with England. That match became the first goalless draw in World Cup history. Think about that. The first ever World Cup match to finish 0-0 happened in Sweden in 1958, and the result forced Brazil to think seriously about changes. The next match was against the Soviet Union. Brazil introduced both Pelé and Garrincha, and suddenly something clicked. The two young attacking talents brought speed, creativity, and unpredictability. Brazil won 2-0, and the world was beginning to notice. Now let's talk about the moment when the legend truly began. Brazil faced Wales in the quarterfinals. The match was tense. There was only goal, and that goal came from 17-year-old teenager. Pelé received the ball, controlled it brilliantly, created space, and finished. The goal made Pelé the youngest goal scorer in World Cup history. And remarkably, he remains the only 17-year-old scorer in the men's World Cup. Just think about how incredible that is. A teenager walks onto world's biggest football stage and immediately creates a record to survive the generations, and that was only beginning. Now Brazil had reached the semi-finals. Standing in their way was France, and France had a superstar of its own. His name was Just Fontaine. Fontaine was having an unbelievable tournament, and we are going to come back to his story because it is one of the greatest individual scoring stories in World Cup history. But first, the semi-final, Brazil versus France, and this match produced one of Pelé's greatest performances. The final score was Brazil 5, France 2, and Pelé scored a hat-trick, 3 goals in a World Cup semi-final at only 17-year-old. The performance announced to the Football World Cup that this was not simply a talented young star, this was the arrival of phenomenon. So guys, thank you very much for your watching. Thank you very much for your likes. Thank you very much for your precious time. Now I have to focus my audience. So guys, I want to listen from you, both of your comments and your likes. Thank you very much guys. Thank you everyone. Four people are watching. Thank you, thank you. Four people are watching, and thank you guys, thank you. The FIFA World Cup 1958, the incredible facts, secrets you never knew. First World Cup held in Sweden, 16 teams champion. Thank you very much guys. Final was Brazil by 5-2. Thank you everyone. Thank you. So guys, I want to listen from you. 3 people are watching. Thank you everyone, thank you. The FIFA World Cup 1958. Thank you everyone, thank you. Thank you everyone. So guys, I'm waiting for your comments, I'm waiting for your likes, I'm missing your likes. Thank you. Keep watching guys, keep comment. Thank you everyone. Now we have to talk about Pelé reputation exploded during this tournament. The world began calling him the king, and it was not just because of his age, it was the way he played. He had technique, balance, speed, intelligence. finishing ability, and an extraordinary ability to remain calm under pressure. The most remarkable thing is that he was doing all of this while still a teenager. Today we often talk about young players being the next big thing, but Pelé was not the next big thing. He was already becoming the big thing. Now let's shift our attention to another incredible story, because if this live stream were only about Pelé, we had be missing one of the greatest achievement of entire tournament. Just Fontaine of France. Fontaine scored 13 goals in 6 matches, and there is the incredible part. 13 remains the score for the most goals scored by one player at the single men's World Cup tournament. He scored against Paraguay, he scored against Yugoslavia, he scored against Scotland, he scored against Northern Ireland, he scored against Brazil. And then in the third place match against West Germany, he scored 4 goals. France won the match 6-3, and Fontaine finished the tournament with 13. Here is one of the strongest stories from Fontaine's tournament. Fontaine arrived in Sweden with only one pair of boots, and during the tournament those boots were damaged. He needed another pair, so he borrowed boots from French reserve striker Stephen Drouet, and Fontaine went on to score his record-breaking 13 goals wearing those borrowed boots. Imagine telling that story today. I scored World Cup goals and broke the tournament scoring record wearing someone else's boot. It's one of those tales that sound almost fictional, but it happened. Now let's talk about the host, Sweden. Playing at the home gave Sweden an enormous advantage in atmosphere and support, but they were not simply there because they were hosts. They had a very good team. They defeated the Soviet Union in the quarterfinal. Then they defeated defending champions West Germany in the semi-finals, and suddenly Sweden had reached the World Cup final. Imagine the excitement. The host nation, a paid stadium, a chance to become world champion on home soil, and standing between Sweden and history was Brazil. 29 June 1958, Lazunda Stadium, Sweden versus Brazil. The stadium was packed and Sweden shocked Brazil early. Nils Lidulum scored after just 4 minutes. Sweden were ahead. Could the host actually win? Brazil responded quickly. Wawa equalized in the 9th minute. Then Wawa scored again. Brazil were now ahead, but greatest moment of final was still coming. Pelé received the ball inside the Swedish penalty area. He lifted it over a defender. Then he finished. a teenager, had just scored one of the most famous goals in World Cup final history. And remember, he was only 17. Brazil continued to attack. Zagallo scored. Sweden pulled one back, and then Pelé scored again. Brazil eventually won. Brazil 5, Sweden 2, 5 goals of 2. Brazil were World Cup world champion for the first time, and Pelé had scored twice in the final. There is another incredible fact here. The 1958 final produced 7 goals, Brazil 5, Sweden 2. That makes it the highest scoring final in World Cup history, and Brazil became the first team to score more than 4 goals in World Cup final. So when people talk about legendary World Cup finals, so